Right, so thank you very much for joining us today. This is our third session of the day so far. We're lucky enough to be joined by Daniel Raza, who, as you should know from seeing on Twitter, is a broadcast journalist. He's worked with some big names in the industry. He also works with British Muslim TV, and he's also created his own documentary, and he currently works for the BBC. And it should be a very chill session. We've got Daniel just running us through an outline of his career, and then moving on to a Q&A. And then obviously, if anyone in the audience wants to send some questions over, they're more than welcome to do so. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Daniel. Feel free to take it away.
Hey guys, thanks a lot for joining me. Thanks a lot, Tom, for inviting me on to speak today. Good afternoon. So I think first thing to say is pretty much that I'm at this kind of stage in my career where I'm still sort of like very early into it. Kind of graduated 3 years ago, but at the same time, you always kind of feel like you're learning. And I think it's important to realize that there's no rush to get into anything. There's no rush to kind of get to that end goal. I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. I've got a slight sort of PowerPoint presentation just to kind of give you an overview of what I've done. I'm sure me and Tom are going to have a little conversation afterwards to, get into a little bit more of the meat of it. So if I can figure out how to share my screen, I haven't done that yet. Here we go. Tom, it says that the host disables screen sharing. If I don't mind carrying on with it without the PowerPoint. If people don't mind,
you might be able to try it now. I think I should have enabled it.
It's all right. No
fingers
worries.
Crossed.
Where are we? Yeah, there we go.
Perfect. Yep.
Can you guys see it?
Can see that.
All right, brilliant.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yep, all good.
I haven't done this for a very long time. I'm not going to lie. Right, start from first slide. Right. Okay. So, I suppose the first thing to say is that at the moment I'm working for the BBC. I'm working in the digital video team, which means I'm editing videos for social media. So for Twitter, for Facebook, and that's for sport. So a lot of those are like 2-minute clips. You get to do a lot of production in that role, and again, still very much learning, and I'm hoping to kind of see where that progresses me. When I started media, I was 15. I actually emailed a community radio station and asked if I could do something because I was really bored in the summer. And they said, yeah, go ahead, do a trial. And I did a 2-hour radio show for them on a voluntary basis. And that went on for 4 years. It was very much kind of a massive learning opportunity because you're essentially teaching yourself at a young age to kind of jump in there and keep conversations going for a very long time. But also because there's no pressure on it. There was no real pressure. I didn't really have much guidance until a couple of years into it. So a lot of it was me kind of getting my friends on and trying to talk about sport for a couple of hours. A lot of it as well was, and I think as we went along, I just emailed international athletes. I had ideas in my head. I was an Aston Villa fan. So I messaged the guy who scored the winning goal when Aston Villa won the Champions League, in the 80s. And that was the first interview that I did. And then there was other people like Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder. It's about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe. So, there's no sort of fear of rejection at that point because I was so young and so early in my career. And sometimes they just turn around and say yes. And just like that, I had a couple of names on my CV that I could kind of mention when I went applying for jobs. And it was just kind of focusing on mainstream sports, but it was actually an Islamic community radio station. So it's really important to know your audience and also to kind of find a niche and find parts of you that are unique. And so I was chasing up sort of reports and interviews with athletes in the local community who were from the Muslim community, also from the Asian community, just kind of highlighting their stories in a way that mainstream media wouldn't have necessarily been able to. I think it's got a lot better in the last couple of years. But yeah, there I am. I'm with Tyson Fury, unrecognizable. Years ago, this is really nice guy, actually. Really nice guy. And then, this is me interviewing a rock star Spud, who's a wrestler in WWE now. Then when I was 18, when I was in university, I actually started studying history. and I got an opportunity to produce and present a TV show for, again, it was an Islamic station. I'm not involved in sort of Islamic TV or Islamic radio anymore, but it was approaching it with kind of like, okay, so I'm working for a community station, but that doesn't mean that I can't cover mainstream stuff. But at the same time, you know, it was an opportunity to get on sort of journalists, to get on sort of other athletes from that community and speak to them. And again, like make a network with them, you know, make contacts with them and just kind of provide a hub for people to tell their story. I was heavily reliant on myself. I'll say like that's another big thing. Like, you know, if you're ever sort of, if you guys are in university at the moment and you're sort of afraid of taking risks and sort of stepping into something big, I'd just say like just have a go. Just have a go, because you know the best thing that the worst thing that can happen is you go in there and you learn stuff. I would have done this very differently now, but certainly at the time, I went in there. There wasn't anybody kind of giving me any guidance there. I had to produce an hour of TV, which mostly was actually me talking to guests and kind of splitting it up and kind of scheduling. You learn a lot of that. How do you turn an hour into 4 separate segments? What do you do with it? You know, how do you keep things interesting? Steep learning curve, as I say. But then kind of I turned it into being able to go out and report a couple of times a month. So I then sort of grew and I developed, and I thought, okay, well, I've learned some skills in university, you know, in terms of how to use a camera, how to use a mic. Like, why don't I go and cover a couple of stories and do a couple of shoots outside? And that kind of also divulged into me making my first documentary for them. And that was sort of like a 45-minute long feature called Redemption, which was about one of my friends called Mobs Badger, who I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. So yeah, there's me presenting it. What I want to say, by the way, first of all, like this wasn't a thing that came along because, like, you know, they were looking to pay somebody big sums of money. It was a big station or something like that. It wasn't like that. Like it was quite small, but at the same time, it was an opportunity to just kind of practice these things, practice presenting, practice producing, and you know, I actually made a lot of contacts whilst working for that show as well, and a lot of the journalists that came on who were actually university students. I kind of like messaged a lot of people who were like, you know, other people in university who were like writing for their university newspapers or doing sort of club football work and that kind of thing. So yeah, and a lot of them went on to have really good careers. So yeah, university. Yeah, so I studied history. I joined the Media Society, having never picked up a camera before. And I think the main thing for me was when I was playing around in the University Media Society was I just wanted to try everything. Just give everything a go. Because you want to have an understanding of the way that things work, whether you want to be a broadcast journalist, whether you want to be a presenter, whether you want to work backstage, have an understanding of everything. Because, you know, that being able to empathize with people in other positions when you do eventually get into a job, like it helps massively. So yeah, I practiced doing camera work, presenting. I did some writing as well. So that was quite cool. And a lot of that stuff at university wasn't sports related. So it was also an opportunity for me to try something else. Sorry if I'm waffling, by the way, guys. I haven't done this before. So I'll just keep knocking through this. I also took part in the debating society, and so I kind of chaired a few debates and that kind of thing at university. Again, it was quite like a small group, but at the same time, I thought it was quite important for me to be able to articulate my points and also to understand points from a different perspective. And again, just applying all of these things to a media role is important. There's probably a lot of things that you guys have done, and I'd say that, you know, pick them apart, figure out how they relate to your role. And I to this day use debating society in my CVs. And I also made a short documentary as part of a history module, as part of a project. And that was on Indian soldiers in the First World War and the Second World War. And that was really fun. I kind of released it on YouTube a couple of years after university as well. But yeah, it was kind of, for me, I really enjoyed that because it was a culmination of all the different little skills that I picked up at university. And I will say this right now, I am not the best cameraman in the world. You know, I'm not the best camera person in the world. I haven't done a lot of presenting since, but at the same time, all of those things, once you've done them a few times, you kind of get an understanding for it, and it's a good basis to learn. So there was and children in need. We did like a children in need thing at university, and I just decided to present that time. That was documentary, and that's Debate Society right there. And now basically, internship through Creative Access. So one thing I will say as well is, I had to wait quite a few months for my opportunity to come for BBC Sport. I actually worked in a office. I actually worked for Npower for 6 months. And that was fine. It was good for me to get office experience. But I think I just want to get this point across that, don't give up if it's difficult to find that first in the first few months or in the first year or so. Never give up at that point. I got this internship with Creative Access in the sort of January after I graduated. And it was what I needed to get in to the BBC. I worked in the sports news video team. So that's like, so if you ever watch BBC News, the sports bulletins, working on that desk. And I also had, as part of that, 6 months experience working for the BBC World Service, where, you really kind of get a little bit more freedom there as well. And you do a little bit of script writing, and it's a really good basis to kind of start a career. I got a full-time role at the end of it. And whilst I've been there, I've pitched and produced my own stories. Even if you come into the BBC at like a researcher role, for example, it's always good to pitch wherever you get into, whatever news organization you get into. Even if you're not in a journalism position just then, I'd always encourage pitching and kind of coming up with your own ideas. And currently on the digital team, editing and helping with video for the web and social media. So that's pretty much a brief overview. I'm sorry if I've bored you all of what I've done. But couple of other things. Maybe I just did a few podcasts and I pretty much just say yes to any kind of networking opportunity, pretty much. That's the other advice I'd say. So is that all right, Tom?
Yeah, no, that's great, Daniel. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned at the beginning, me and Daniel have already gone through some questions with each other. We have some planned answers, but obviously anyone in the chat box, you can raise your hand if you want to ask, be unmuted, or you can just write down a message. If you have any questions for Daniel while he's here, please do feel free to fire away. But I suppose use the ones that I've already got prepared ahead of time. I thought I'd ask you, because as you mentioned, you were part of the Debate Society while at uni. I wonder what kind of skills you learned from that, which translated well into the work you're doing today. And also, because you mentioned that it's still on your CV to this day, how have you marketed that experience on your CV?
So in terms of the stuff at university, so I would say that, I think with university media and community radio, it's great that it's all off your own back. I'd say that's one of the great things to say. First of all, make that your passion, make that your thing. What you will have done there, and I think that you've really got to big it up. I think for a lot of people, they might get this idea that, it's only a small thing that I've done. But if you've made like a community, or if you made like a podcast at university and it's only got 2 listeners, you still produced a 2-hour podcast. Do you know what I mean? You still produced that podcast. You've still gone off there and given yourself production experience. So with the university stuff, I will have always put in my CV that, I've tried a bit of camera work. I can do camera work. I've produced a 5-minute documentary for university. I'd just say that big it all up. Make a list of these things. Think of every single thing that you've done, and does that make sense, Tom?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. But I suppose thinking more precisely about the debating side of it and this aspect of like having to explain your reasoning and how that's translated to the work you've done in journalism and stuff. You want to share some insight into that? Yeah,
definitely. So I think when you work when you go into journalism, you've always got to, I think, first of all, leave your biases at the door. That's one really important thing. But also you've just kind of got to be able to empathize with people. I suppose like in the day-to-day in the office, first of all, like, it's a good thing to be in there and kind of understand where people are coming from all the time. But, when you're presenting, when you're producing, you've got to look at a piece of information and think, is this what everybody's going to think? Because you're there to represent anybody. You're there to represent everybody. You know, it's particularly, say, for example, if you're working for an organization like the BBC, you're there, you know, working for the license fee payers, and you're there to represent a diverse number of voices. So I'd say it's kind of practicing those communication skills, understanding where people are coming from, and also being able to get to your point in a nice and sharp manner. I think even when it comes down to when you're doing script writing, you know, you've got to write your scripts in 20 seconds, where, you know, perhaps in the past you might have tried to get to that point in a minute. And I think that it's just one of those things that for me really helped me develop that side of things.
Amazing. Sounds good. And I suppose building on from that and thinking about university radio specifically, how did you translate that onto your CV? How have you expressed your passion and your experience of student radio to future employers?
So I'd say that most of my radio experience was community, but I'd say that community radio, university radio, they're great. They're brilliant, because you're then walking into a job, or, you know, if you apply to a radio job, if you apply to a journalism job, you've applied there with production experience. Because when you're at university, you don't have bosses or producers telling you what to do. You've got to go in there and you've kind of got to do that yourself. And for me, it was always kind of getting across that I produced, I sourced, I presented. Anybody that's running a university radio show or running a community radio show will have likely done those things. And you've kind of got to get that across. Think of every little thing that you did. Sourcing is very important. Being able to email guests and get people on and get the right kind of guests on, that's really important. And demonstrating that you've been able to do that is great. And also just being able to demonstrate that you can talk about a wide variety of things, and also knowing the role that you're applying for. You know, if you're going to apply for a sports role, see if you've got like sports podcast experience. And yeah, I'd say it's a lot of that, really.
And as you mentioned in your presentation, you've got to interview some pretty big names like Fury and Wilder. What is it like? Can you just talk us through some of your stories of getting to interview people? Because I mean, I imagine at times they can be quite passionate and quite vocal. How do you keep it quite calm and a bit more relaxed during a kind of radio interview?
You know what's funny? When I first started community radio, I was 15, and I got in trouble because I got a caller on the phone, and they basically said, you know, you shouldn't be talking about sport on this channel. Like, you know, it's not what we talk about here. And I said I called them rude and hung up. And I didn't quite get in trouble. They pulled me up on it, and eventually were like, okay, yeah, fair enough, whatever. But I think you kind of like learn these things, you know, as you grow up, as you mature. You know, I was 15, right? But I think it was really interesting for me being sort of like 17 years old and interviewing somebody like Tyson Fury, and asking them at the start of the interview to keep it family friendly, and you're there kind of worrying, you know, whether they're going to do that or not. But to be fair to me, was great. You know, I've had callers kind of jump on and swear, and you've got to know how to deal with that. You've got to, you know, try not to get in a panic. You've got to kind of keep your cool about it, apologize, move on. Deontay Wilder was a brilliant one that we interviewed as well. He just kind of came on and yelled "Bomb Squad" at the start of it, which is his catchphrase. Kind of like kept me startled. I've been like bullied on air by wrestlers as well. Because I interviewed wrestlers. I don't know if any of you guys are know of them, but like I've interviewed like Mick Foley and Bully Ray, and one of them definitely like bullied me through an interview, but just kind of it was then kind of, because it's pre-recorded, you can kind of get through that. It was all good.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. I went to Edgbaston Cricket Ground a couple of times as well, because this is Birmingham based, and I thought it was really cool that sort of guys like, and this is a good thing to say for sure, right? Most of the time when you interview athletes, they're going to be nice, like they're really friendly, and that will kind of give you confidence. Like, they're not out to get you. They will see that, you know, you're kind of there to speak about them because you're passionate, and because you're there to kind of present stuff in a positive light generally. So like Shoaib Malik and Ian Bell were brilliant to me. Tyson Fury was brilliant to me as well. Eddie Hearn, I went to a press conference to kind of interview them both. But yeah, I think in general, it's just a case of don't get startled. They're people just like you and me. And, there's no harm in ever asking them for an interview. There's never any harm in messaging someone and asking if they're down to talk, because, the worst they can do is say no. And if they said yes, they're interested in talking to you anyway. So generally it's going to be a positive experience, but definitely these things, it was a great thing for me to put on my CV. And it's good to be able to list those names.
Great. That's some really good advice. And as you mentioned a bit earlier, obviously you're very keen on radio media, but you've also done quite a lot of film media. And you had a role with British Muslim TV when you were 18. I just wondered how you went about sourcing news stories, and also when you spoke about sport, how did you ensure that what you're reporting on was original? Because I think a lot of the time, student journalists, when it comes to sports writing, they might worry, 100 other publications will be talking about the matches that just happened at weekend. How can I make it fresh and make you want to click on mine story and not others, if you know what I mean?
I think there's a couple of things you can do. I think when it comes to like a match report, if you're like writing a match report, for example, you can maybe approach it differently. Maybe it's more of an opinion piece. Maybe it's more of an analysis piece. And I think that if you, again, build a network and you talk to enough people and get them to read it, that's cool. If not many people read it straight away, that's cool as well. Because when you do go to apply to a job later, and if this is something that you're passionate about, if somebody else has already done a match report on Liverpool versus Manchester United the other night, don't let that turn you off. Put yourself into that piece. This is you. It's a different piece. It's how you're kind of presenting yourself. And that, all of these things, the more writing that you do, the more of these little pieces that you do, it's more that you can put on your CV, and it's more that you can show to a future employer. But as for original stories, I think that, again, it's about networking. It's about kind of knowing how to look. Like for me, it was a lot of search terms on Twitter. I got onto Twitter when I was like 16 or something like that. And like, I think it was maybe a little bit easier to find people then, but you'll always see people who are doing sort of charity work in their area. You'll see people, for example, who are doing sort of marathons, like longer marathons for charity. Look at those kinds of people, go speak to them, see what they're doing, why they're doing it. Maybe provide some of that human interest as well. And the more sort of community-based athletes that you speak to, the more contacts that they'll probably provide to you. And I think just kind of over time, that's the way it happens. I would never say that you should rush yourself to find a story. You should kind of actively be looking, and actively kind of keeping an interest in what's going on. I think find your niche, know what your niche is. If you're looking for athletes, if you're looking for people doing athletics, for example, maybe don't go to the guys and girls who are sort of older and are already well known. Maybe look at who's doing it in university. Maybe look at who the up and coming stars are going to be. There's loads of different ways you can go about it. But I think knowing your passion and letting your passion guide you is a really important way to look at it. For me personally, the only way that I can kind of apply it to myself, I'm a Pakistani Muslim. And for me, I was able to look around for Muslim athletes who didn't get the mainstream coverage. I, for example, did a documentary on a guy who, I'm trying to remember what he did now. Yeah, he did like over 100 rounds of straight Muay Thai as a record run. I did a story on him, for example. But, this might not have been picked up on by other well-known media organizations. I looked at people who were providing sporting opportunities for young kids in their in underserved for young kids of underserved backgrounds in different areas. I think it's finding your passion and running with it. I think that's a good way to start, and I think that's the best starting point, basically.
I think those are some very wise words on finding something you're passionate about and really just going for the moon with it. So I think a lot of people in this chat really will appreciate that. Moving on to my next question. And again, just to remind anyone in the chat, if you have any questions for Daniel, please feel free to just pop them in the chat and I'll keep my eye out for them. But I don't know if you mentioned it before, but you are an Aston Villa fan. And I understand because I'm an Everton fan myself. And when you're doing writing, it's very difficult to not try and let your own personal biases get in there. I know you did mention this a bit earlier, but how do you maintain kind of an unbiased image, or do you think it's important to keep an unbiased image, or do you think having a bit of bias, having a bit of edge to your writing might make it stick out a bit more? I'm just wondering what your take is on that.
Well, look, Tom. Look, I mean, if you look at my social media, you'll know I'm an Aston Villa fan.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I work for. But look, I think that when it comes to your journalism, and when it comes to when it comes to your tweets, first of all, it's okay for people to know that you're a fan. If you're a fan, you can't stop that, right? But maybe that that doesn't mean go out and start insulting teams. If you're a Manchester United fan, you don't start making fun out of Liverpool every time they lose a game. Do you know what I mean? I think that's an important thing. And I think, when it comes down to it, we all know how to control our biases. You don't, when it comes to work, the bias shouldn't come out. News is news and you're there to represent everybody. You've got to remember that and know who you're working for as well. Know their policies, because at the end of the day, if you're an Arsenal fan, but you're working for an Arsenal podcast, that's fine, right? Yeah. It's a little bit different. But if you're working for a major sports news organization, then you just kind of got to control it. But I wouldn't say it's anything that's ever sort of really worried me too much. I think when it comes to those news stories, maybe ask somebody, maybe ask the person next to you, does this read okay? Does this read like I'm biased? Because I suppose bias is always going to seep through a little bit. But generally, just remember who you're serving and think about if you'd be happy to see a fan of another team write something like that.
Yeah, very wise words. So just moving on to the next question. So as you mentioned at the beginning, you've recorded, directed and produced your own 45-minute long documentary. So I just wanted to try and understand what that experience was like, and maybe you could just explain a bit more about the topic of the documentary, and if perhaps there's anything that you do differently if you were to remake it today. Yeah.
Okay. So I think worth saying the first thing about this documentary is it was about a friend of mine called Mubs Bajwa, who's sadly passed away now. He was a Muay Thai fighter. He was doing crazy challenges. He did those 100 straight rounds of Muay Thai, which was brilliant. He was doing a lot of charity work. I know he went on a punching bag for about 8 hours straight whilst fasting, and this was his sort of return. It was like it was a preview to his return to Muay Thai after having retired, like I think it was 9 years previous or 6 years previous or something like that. But basically, he'd been out a long time because he'd had a career-ending injury and he was coming back. So he kind of put the idea to me. He was like, "What if we did a documentary?" Now, I think first of all, when people say these kinds of things to you, be careful. Don't always promise people things. Don't overpromise things. In this case, it was a good idea. I liked it. I liked the idea. I took it to British Muslim TV, who I was working for at the time, and I was doing sports talk for. I was like, let's just do a special episode of sports talk, but let's air this documentary. And I'd never done anything like this before. I didn't know what I was doing, right? But the producer, the executive producer there at the time, said to me, "Well, can you timeline it? Can you bullet point it for like 45 minutes?" And this was a shocking thing to me. It's like, I've only ever gone onto the radio by myself, gone onto the TV by myself with people and talked. This was about scheduling. You've got to get it right. So I did that, and we hired a camera person. They helped us out, helped me out during the shoot, probably a lot more than he probably wanted to, but kind of helping me find the shots and that kind of thing. But it was helpful for me because I learned to do a little bit of camera work at the time. I learned how to use one of the dangling mics. Forget what they're called. But just as an experience, it was good because it was just go out there and record. There was no sort of special shots or special things that we needed to do. It was, who are we going to interview? Let's go and interview them and let's work it around them. I suppose like what I would have done differently is I might have wanted to see a little bit more archive footage. I might have done it over the course of a longer period. And I suppose as well, maybe it didn't need to be 45 minutes. Maybe this would have worked now in current day. Maybe it would have worked better as a 20-minute YouTube documentary. But as I say, the opportunity was there to do it, and it was worth it in the end.
And have you got any? I'm just running this kind of off the cuff. Do you have any other ideas for documentaries that you might be producing? Because obviously you have a full-time job with the BBC now, but is documentary filmmaking still something of a hobby of yours? Something that you do part-time?
Do you know what? I really want to do more of that kind of work, but what I will say is, I think it would need like a big idea from me.
Right.
I think that, you know, where I'm at right now, I think I've just been sort of really focused on the job. But when I was at university, I did do like a documentary on World War I and World War II soldiers. I'd say that whilst you're at uni, if you have the opportunity to do something like that, do it. Like, absolutely do it. And I suppose even outside of that, if you have a camera, go for it. Like, there's nothing stopping you. I think for me, like over the last few years, I haven't focused on that side of things so much, but I definitely would do it again. I'd say that, like, if you have editing software and you have a camera and you have an idea, that's all you need to run with it, essentially. But documentaries don't have to be 45 minutes long anymore. You know, some of the best YouTube content that I consume is like 20 minutes or 10 minutes long. You know, that's a documentary either way.
Great stuff. Just moving on to the next question. Again, just reiterating to the chat, any questions, feel free to pop them in. So I think you mentioned that when you came to work for the BBC, you took part in some sort of scholarship type scheme in which they were aiming to promote BAME talent. Has being a BAME journalist influenced your experience of the industry? And if so, I just wonder how it has influenced your experience.
Yeah, 100%. So it was an internship with Creative Access, who looked to get people from underserved communities into media and other roles as well, other areas of arts. But 100%, like being from an Asian background, you know, I have a unique perspective. I have story ideas that somebody from a white background might not come up with. They might not see it. They might not see the reasoning in chasing a story like that. It's not a criticism. We're all unique in our own ways. You know, diversity is really important, and it's really important to have in organizations because of those different sort of ways of thinking and of those different ideas that people come up with. I think it's important to know what makes you different. I think, you know, you look at things differently. Sometimes you're having a conversation. Sometimes somebody wants to run a story, and it's important to speak out if you think that they might be covering it wrong. You know, if somebody's doing a story on Islam, for example, or Asians, I'm probably going to look at it differently if they're not from that background. But yeah, it's important for you to have those views there so that other people can pick up on that and get those understandings. The type of stories I've covered in the past might not have been spotted by other people. I think I regularly pitch things during Ramadan, working on stories about hijabi athletes, also just kind of at BMTV, at British Muslim TV, the idea that I was constantly kind of looking for Muslim athletes is, that's not necessarily a hub that's going to be there on mainstream media, but at the time for me, it was a unique opportunity to go and find that, because whatever background you're from, it's important to kind of, find the stories from your perspective and tell those stories as well. See it as a responsibility almost, in a way.
Fantastic. And I'm down to my final question now. Oh, and we've just had one last question coming from the chat. Fantastic. So Rahul has asked, well, he said, "Hi, Daniel. Hope you're well." He's wondering if you found any problems of bias against you, especially as there is less diversity in media, sports media especially. And then to further that, he's asked, what do you think one can do about this individually?
One second. Sorry, Dad, I'm in a call. Sorry, 1 minute, guys.
No, that's all right.
Sorry, my parents just asking me something. Where was I? Sorry, Zoom.
Yeah, sorry. The question is in the chat, but I'll just read it out
Yeah,
again.
sorry, I've got it.
Oh,
Apologies.
no
This is what you get for working from home, guys. This is it. Right. So you wondered if you found any problems of bias against me. No, I wouldn't say I found problems of bias against myself. I think the way to look at it, Rahul, and hello, by the way, I know Rahul. I think without looking at it negatively, like I think don't approach it from a negative standpoint. If there's people like, I'll say this right now, if there's people like that, if there's people that do discriminate these days, those people aren't going to last long in journalism. Like, you know, we're approaching things from a different standpoint now. I think diversity in media is a really important thing. I think we're understanding that. I think a lot of work's been done. I think that, you know, especially with the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter movement as well, you know, particularly last year, I think people are beginning to understand the anxieties that people from diverse backgrounds kind of have. For me, I would say, Rahul, if that is something that's part of your personality, see what makes you unique in that way. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Why do you have a different perspective to the other people in that organization that you're looking at and thinking is pretty white? What can you bring to them? You know, how can you make them think differently? What are they ignoring? It's none of this is negatively charged. It's positively charged. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. I hope that helps in a way.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So I mean, do you mind me asking, like, where sort of, yeah, do you mind me asking what made you kind of ask that? If you got any sort of experience, I suppose that makes
no
you
experience, but then I was just thinking. I mean, you don't see that many people of like from our background working in sports media in UK. So
yeah,
like most of the journalists I follow, they're all British. They're not like, say, of Indian origin or Asian origin. So yeah.
Yeah, we need to change that, don't we? We need to change that. Like, that's important. Big time. Yeah. I think that it's an important. I think it's a problem that a lot of organizations probably realize and are trying to correct now. Because yeah, everybody's face needs to be that, whether that be Asian people, Black people, whether that be, you know, people from LGBT backgrounds as well. Everybody needs to be represented. Otherwise, you know, who are you producing content for? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Thanks, Rahul.
Okay, so I mean, I have one last question. So again, if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, or just pop one in the chat while I'm getting this out, feel free to do so. But just to close off, I thought we'd leave it on quite a significant note and ask if you could go back in time to when you first graduated from university and get started on your career. Could you give us one piece of, and you could give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be and why?
Okay, I saw this question. I kind of had, I suppose, three things, but like one thing's more important than all of them. Right. So the first thing is to back yourself more. Right. So I suppose that's the first thing. You know, if you feel like you have an idea that you might not think is going to work, I'd say that whilst you're at university, whilst you're in control of producing your own content, just do it. Like, do it, give it a go. What's the worst that can happen, right? It might turn out to be brilliant, and you're going to learn at the end of it. I'd say the second thing for me was I would have wanted to get more experience in a proper news organization, because I'd say at the time it was great working for British Muslim TV and working for Unity FM, but I was doing a lot of that off my own back. And I would have benefited, I think, a lot more from having mentors and seeing how things work in somewhere like a mainstream organization. I think the main thing for me was, no matter how life gets, always focus on your goals. I will say this, there was a point in time I was ready to give up in media because it looked like the opportunities weren't coming. But what I did was, during that time, I continually kept on podcasting. It wasn't big, it wasn't massive, but I kept on podcasting. I kept on doing little bits and pieces, keeping a little bit of a creative outlet, have that creative outlet. But, you know, think about, if luck's not going your way right now, if you're not getting things coming your way right now, what can you do up until the point that opportunity does come? So keep on looking, keep on thinking about what you might do, whether that be a postgrad, whether that be an internship, you know, whether that be a 1 month internship, whether that be a 6 month internship, whether that be a little bit of work experience, just keep on focusing on that goal. Don't give up on it. And yeah, just keep that focus, and you will get there in the end, I suppose is the main thing that I'd say to myself.
I think that's some fantastic advice, and I'm sure that everyone in this chat will hopefully be able to heed that advice in the future. So yeah, I suppose with no further question in the chat and all of my questions done, it's time to put this meeting to a close. Daniel, I don't know if you want to maybe highlight a Twitter perhaps where people might be able to message you any questions that they have later on or anything like that.
Yeah, sure. If anybody has any questions, feel free to message me. It's at Raza Journal. Let me just type it in over here. So it's, there you go. I hope that everybody was able to take something away from this. As I say, Tom, haven't done anything like this before. Thank you a lot for, you know, obviously inviting me down to come and talk to everybody. I really just, yeah, I think it's nice to pass that kind of knowledge and those kinds of experiences on.
I was going to say you wouldn't know that this is your first time doing this kind of thing. I think you present yourself very well, and I think everyone I think everyone will agree with me when I say that it's been a very informative session. So thank you very much, Daniel.
Oh, thanks, mate. Appreciate it. Yeah, believe in every single one of you guys. Just find your passion and run with it. Yeah, as I say, you guys should just network as well. Just find yourself as many contacts as you can. You know, find different people that can help you in your journey, and yeah, just get as much done as possible, let's say.
Amazing. Thank you very much for joining us, Daniel. Have a good rest of your day.
Cheers. Thank you. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye.